Okay, one of our favorite times of the week. In fact, Dibs, I would argue it's one of the only things that saves Tuesday. Tuesday's the worst day of the week.
Yeah.
But it's the day that we get to talk to Peter King.
It's the 7th best day. I'd like you to be a little bit more positive.
That's a good way to say it.
Yeah.
It's a good way to say it. Look,
number 7.
We have to do it every single week. There's no way around it.
True.
But I do look forward to these conversations with the great Peter King, NBC Sports, Odyssey NFL Insider. His Football Morning in America column is a must-read every single week. Hello, Peter. How are you today?
What's going on, guys?
Well, everybody, as you might imagine, is feeling a little bit better around these parts. So, in your column, in sort of the bullet points that are on social media to promote the column, you wrote 49ers make the smart move. What specifically were you talking about, Peter?
Well, I thought that what they did in this game more than anything else, I know that Kyle seemed to disapprove of that first throw, the first touchdown pass of Brock Purdy. But, and again, I'm not going to sit here and say I'm Joe strategist on offense. But what I am going to say is the reason I loved that throw is that it showed that my quarterback has the confidence to layer a ball in there exactly to the right spot. And for the many who have been critical of Brock Purdy, I think what this game showed is that if he has his weapons back, he has a little bit of time, he has his left tackle back, he's going to win games. I mean, this reminded me so much of the Dallas game because the quarterback made plays when he had time and when he had his weaponry. And I think just as far as being smart, okay, so look, I wrote a good chunk in this column about the Chase Young trade. And I think the thing that people might not have realized when it was made is you have to think about the way the NFL is structured and how they reward teams when they lose high-priced free agents. So I pointed out in my column that assuming that the 49ers lose Chase Young after this season and assuming that he gets a contract of over $20 million a year and assuming that the 49ers don't go out and sign a couple of high-priced free agents because I think their days of wine and roses in the free agent market ended for a little while anyway with Javon Hargrave signing. But assuming all that, then they would have traded the 101st pick in this year's draft for half a year of Chase Young, which already began to start paying dividends on Sunday in Jacksonville. They would have traded the 101st pick in the draft for a half year of Chase Young, and in 25, somewhere around the 98th or 99th pick overall in this draft. And I don't know how anybody could argue with the results of that.
And that's an approach that they've taken in terms of minority hiring and in the coaching staff and the GM and getting comp picks back the other way. So it feels like they're working ahead of the curve. But I want to touch on what you said about Deebo Samuel. Is the threat of Deebo Samuel and the way they use him motion-wise maybe as impactful as when he actually has the football?
That's such a good point because I think one of the things that Mike McDaniel has used to optimum efficiency in Miami is using what I call and what San Francisco uses several teams, not a lot, use a lot, and that is this thing called orbit motion. So it's not just putting a guy in motion. It's putting him in motion so that when he comes out of his motion, he has momentum going toward the line of scrimmage. Do you know how hard it is to block a Deebo Samuel anyway when he's in motion and he's not stationary at the line? That's hard. But if Deebo Samuel has momentum going toward the line of scrimmage at that time, one of the things that's interesting, he's going to be very dangerous. One of the things that's interesting is that if you watch a Canadian Football League game, they allow not just motion, but they allow receivers to get like a 10-yard head start. They can start sprinting, before the snap of the ball, and they can start sprinting so that when they get to the line of scrimmage, they're already at full speed. And I think that is the attempt when you have a real talented or a bunch of talented receivers to confuse the defense and to not allow them to get their hands on a receiver coming right off the line of scrimmage.
Peter King with us, Willard and Dibs, 95.7 The Game. We do it every single Tuesday. Peter, in your column, you quote Fred Warner not only talking about the rest that they got from the bye, but he used the word reflection. And then he also said to the team in the in the post-game celebration, we learned our lesson. What did you take from all that? They were reflecting on what, and what lesson did they learn?
I think they basically learned what the rest of us learned about this team, which is that if they're at full strength, they are a dangerous, dangerous team. And I think, what Fred Warner talked to me about, that they're physically and mentally rested. And so everybody always says, no matter when you get a bye, the bye came at a great time for us. The bye came at a perfect time for the Niners, because not only did they need one more week for two of their five most important offensive players in Trent Williams and Deebo Samuel, maybe two of their three most important, but not only did they have another week to get them healed, but I also think that this team needed a little while to basically say, hey, listen, let's just take a break. We've lost three in a row. We haven't played great. We haven't played our best on either side of the ball. And look, for the 49ers to score 17 points 3 weeks in a row, something is wrong. He saw it. They all saw it. And so that's the reason to me why he said they really needed this, and he thought that they benefited mentally and physically.
And now they head into a stretch where they've got 3 games in 17 days, including a date looming with Philadelphia. If you're looking at the 49ers now, Peter, do you look at the team that is back at near the top of the NFC, or is it a team that never really left that perch?
I don't think they ever left that perch. I mean, I don't know who the best team is, but it's clear now. They've played 10 weeks in the NFL, and there's 5 or 6 teams that, to me, stand above the rest. The 49ers are one of them. Are they second? Are they sixth? Are they third, or are they 7th or 5th? I don't know. And the interesting thing is, it doesn't matter at all. It just simply doesn't matter. What matters is that if you look at the 49ers, you have a schedule that's going to be difficult. You got the Bucs at home. I don't think that will be necessarily difficult compared to what else is on tap. But then it's at Seattle and at Philadelphia. And look, at Seattle's a short week game. Every time you play the Seahawks, I don't care how good they are, it is going to be one of your most physically demanding games of the year. And for the 49ers to have to play the Seahawks this year in weeks 12 and 14, that right there is a huge challenge. And then follow that with having to chase Kyler Murray around for 4 quarters down in Arizona. So they've got a tough go, in the next month or so. But the short week game at Seattle, that's really going to be tough for them.
Peter, I want to press that conversation that you just brought up a little bit. When you say there are maybe 6 teams and we're not sure yet who the best is, and it doesn't matter. If I acknowledge all of that, but what if we asked it this way? Because all of the teams on some level have shown some sort of warts. But I wonder if we assume each of them are at their best. The best we've seen of each team, who's the best?
Well, the best we've seen of each team is, I would say that San Francisco's the best. But I'm not sure that that's the logical way to ask the question. Not logical, but that's not the way that I would want to find the answer to who's the best team in the NFC right now. Because to me, look, the 49ers won a game at Jacksonville and just wiped out a 6-2 team, right? And then the 49ers beat a team that looked like it might be the best team in football when they played them, Dallas, and they beat them by 32 points. So at their best, they have played good teams better than anybody else has. But, you can't eliminate what happens when they are not fully healthy. And so that's why, we've talked about this 74 times this year. And why I think that part of the strategy of this season is not playing every game like it's the 7th game of the World Series. The strategy of this season, in my opinion, needs to be that if things are looking good in the course of a game, get Deebo Samuel out of there. Get Brandon Ayuk out of there. And it's hard to say this, too, because you want to keep your quarterback in, but if Trent Williams can get a blow every now and then, in the fourth quarter of a game, get him out of there. And so that, I think, is really, really important with this team, maybe more important than it is with some other teams. But, look, I look at all these contending teams right now. I look at Detroit. I look at Philadelphia. I look at Dallas. And playing at their peak, I think the 49ers, if you take any of those four teams, you take their best 2 or 3 games this year playing at their peak, nobody's had a better, say, 2-game run anyway than the 49ers against Dallas and Jacksonville.
Yeah, and yet we have a big one on Monday night, Eagles at Chiefs, we can all look forward to. You said something there that was interesting in terms of pulling players out when the score is lopsided, yet we saw Kyle Shanahan actually put Christian McCaffrey back in to try to get that consecutive touchdown record. What did you think of that record pursuit and the sort of a risk-reward play that Kyle Shanahan made there?
I'm not crazy about those things. I've never felt that you ought to play the game with records in mind. I think if records happen naturally, that's great. But personally, I wouldn't have felt that great about Christian McCaffrey, continuing to build that record and to actually set the record. If he scored a game, however much time there was, 5 minutes, I don't even know how much time was left, but the game had been over for a half hour. I've just never been a big fan of that myself. But again, I remember too, a long time ago, when I asked Jimmy Johnson one time about why do you have Emmitt Smith in games in the fourth quarter when you guys are up 17 or 21? Why? And he goes, look, Emmitt wants to leave his footprints in the sand in the NFL. He wants to be remembered forever. And he wants to have 7 carries when the game is out of reach because that helps him to build his profile a little bit. And we can say anything we want about that. They ought to put the backup in. Bad if Emmitt gets hurt and everything. But then again, we're not the coach. We don't know how Christian McCaffrey feels. We don't know how Kyle Shanahan feels. I've never asked him about this, so I'm not in favor of doing that, but I do think that there is some benefit to knowing that your players would respond positively to that. So I'm not really bothered by it, but it's not something that I think is such a great idea.
Peter King is with us on Willard and Dibs, 95.7 The Game, Odyssey NFL Insider. Peter, going back to the Trent Williams and Deebo Samuel injuries, the football stuff here is obvious. They're really good players. But having been around the locker room, I wonder how you would put into words what more is there to it than just the football, the emotional leadership that those two guys bring?
You walk around that team, and look, I'm around them 3 times a year, so I can't tell you, in a deep or insightful way what exactly they mean to their teammates. But I do know this. I walked into that locker room after the Dallas game, and the biggest crowd was around Trent Williams. And it's like he was the oracle. Everybody wants to know what he thinks, what he says, what does this win mean. Thought it was really cool, and we talked about this at the time. Thought it was really cool where he was telling the reporters, let's not get too excited. We got to go play Myles Garrett next week, and they're really, really good. And, so that's a good message to hear from arguably, your offensive leader. Your guy along with maybe Fred Warner, who everybody on the team looks to. Hey, what do you say, leader? And so I think that is really important. And I think with Deebo, there are some guys. I remember a long time ago, Jason Garrett was coaching the Cowboys, and Jason Garrett's a huge Yankee fan. And so before an exhibition game, he went because he had never met or really talked to Derek Jeter. And he said to Jeter, hey, I'm curious what you think about this. Probably our 2 veterans who everybody looks to are Tony Romo and Jason Witten. And yet they hardly ever say a word. They're not the kind of guys who get up in the locker room and say X, Y, and Z. And Derek Jeter said, listen, I never thought, for me anyway, it was about what I said. I thought it was significant that when the guys start to drive in, and we got to be in whatever time it is, 7:30 or 8 o'clock on a work day, I thought it was important that when they walked into the stadium in Tampa in spring training, that they saw me out there 45 minutes before we had to report, 45 minutes out before everybody got there, taking ground balls. It's not anything I had to say. It was just what I did. And I think in a lot of ways, it's what Deebo does. It's him being a physical presence who will not be denied. And I look at him, and I look at a lot of guys, and they lead in different ways. Trent Williams, I'm sure, says more than Deebo Samuel does, and that's good for Trent Williams. He's doing what comes naturally to him. And I think Deebo Samuel is doing what comes naturally to him, too.
And to have those leaders takes a lot of pressure off the young quarterback, Brock Purdy, and yet you look at a dominant win over Jacksonville, and what can you do for an encore? Well, in comes Tampa Bay and Baker Mayfield. What's been your impression of what Baker's done in Tampa in kind of a tough situation for a team that still is very much in the playoff race?
It's an odd thing with Baker Mayfield because I'm not the biggest Baker Mayfield backer. I understand that he's been in some tough situations, but when you're on 4 teams in a little over a year, and I think I'm right in saying he's on Cleveland, Carolina, the Rams, and Tampa in a little more than a year. And you say to yourself, well, there's a reason for this. And look, a lot of guys have to go because of whatever reason, or their time's up somewhere and all that. So I understand him leaving Cleveland, but he had every chance to win the Carolina job. He also had every chance to show Sean McVay and everybody that, look, I'll do whatever you want. If I need to sit behind Matthew Stafford for a while, I don't care. I just want to be immersed in this offense and be a great player. And at some point, whenever Stafford leaves, maybe I'll be the guy. But I think what Baker Mayfield wanted to do was he wanted to play. I don't blame him. And so he leaves there. It's just, I think when I look at Baker Mayfield, I look at a guy, he wasn't in the greatest situations. But if he was a really good player, he would have won one of those 3 jobs. And he didn't. And so we'll see what happens. Now, Tampa, he's played above average up to this point, and I think he's got a chance right now to be their quarterback going forward. Now, for 5 years, I don't know. For 2024, that's what it's looking like. And so, good for him. And they're very, very dangerous at the receiver position with Mike Evans and Chris Godwin and a couple of young kids. I mean, they're a decent challenge, but this is a game that, if you look at the schedule right now, maybe you could argue that the Rams game in Week 18 at LA, at home might arguably be easier. Who knows? But this is a game is an absolute must win because of who else is on their schedule coming up.
Peter King with us here on Willard and Dibs. Peter, certainly want to get a other side now conversation or comment from you about all of this Steve Wilks, Kyle Shanahan. Where should Steve Wilks be? He moves down to the sideline. And so after these 3 weeks of discussing that and looking at the comments Kyle made, what do you make of all that and just sort of the relationship that the two of those have going forward?
When I think back on the 49ers on defense, since Kyle Shanahan has been coaching, I think of Robert Saleh being very visible on the sidelines, being a very hands-on coach on the sidelines during games. And I've always thought that's probably what Kyle Shanahan likes. And it seemed apparent that Steve Wilks wanted to be the eye in the sky. But look, there's 2 things I would say about this. Number one, I simply do not think it was a very big deal where Steve Wilks was. Even though they played a lot better on defense, I think one of the reasons they played a lot better on defense is because Chase Young was there contributing 4 pressures and a half sack. Javon Hargrave was playing as well as he has overall as a Niner. And Nick Bosa was benefiting from both of those things, as was Eric Armstead. But I kind of look at that and I think, I just don't think it's that big a deal. If Kyle Shanahan really wants the guy to be on the sidelines, then be on the sidelines and everybody cope with it. It's fine. But I don't think the score would have been any different from 34-3 if Steve Wilks was upstairs for that game.
Peter, great stuff as always. We thank you. We look forward to next week.
All the best, guys. Thanks a lot.
All right, there he is. That was Odyssey NFL insider Peter King. We can react to that